have I got something special for you all today. We're going to take this one a little bit slower. This was a raw wood build that was brought to me by a client, and she asked me, can you paint it a glossy pink? To which I replied, you know that it's raw wood, right? And she said, yes, just please make it look fabulous. And so, let's get started. When you're working with raw wood, the most important thing you need to know is the prep work makes all the difference. I spent 90% of my time on this piece on the prep and all the sanding, and 10% on actually painting it. This is one of my favorite products, linked below in my Amazon storefront. It's Bondo wood filler, and it is incredible. But you do need to work in small sections at a time, and you probably should get a better surface to put this on because the paper was not a good idea at all. Once I finally mixed this up, and I'm talking like mix it up like Cold Stone, but guess what? It's gonna set in about 5 minutes, and so you need to get it on your piece. I'm using a resin and epoxy tool, but you can get these plastic tools anywhere. You can use a spatula if you want. You just need a straight edge to apply it and then pull it. It's really more of a scraping technique, but you'll see what I mean as I go. If I would have painted this piece just as is, if I could have primed it to seal in all the knots on the wood and any tannins or dyes, and then I could have painted it. However, you would have seen every crack and crevice that a raw wood build like this comes with. And so I'm going through with Bondo to make sure that I can fill these cracks and crevices or the variations in the wood as best I can before I start sanding it. Even though this piece was put together with really great wood, it still had lots of cracks and crevices where the wood was joined together, and in all of the knots there was lots of gaps. Now, that it's a natural in a knot to have space and all that, and if we were staining it, those would look great. But since the client wants it painted, and again, what the client wants, the client gets, we're going to fill every single one of those knots and make sure that it's sealed. The reason that you only mix up a little bit at a time is because this dries so quickly. So you want to get out your putty, put the hardener in it, mix it around, use that, apply it on. Go get another pile, mix the hardener, put it on. Once the Bondo starts to harden, it turns very rock solid. You can tap it with your nail to make sure that it's fully dry. Especially in the deeper spots, it's going to take a little bit longer. Very surface spots don't take very long to dry, like 5 minutes. For the rest of the piece, I'm using Dry Deck spackling. Dry Deck spackling sands super easy, and so I'm using it as a filler for any variation in the wood, any other cracks that I've noticed, any soft spots or dents in the wood. It just goes in nice and easy and fills the majority of them. My DeWalt sander is my best friend. This is a palm hand sander. You can take sheets of my favorite sandpaper, which is the purple kind, and fold it into quarters and use this in your palm sander. It's really easy to break it over an edge like that, especially when it's 80 grit. It's really easy to break. With the higher grits, you do have to fold them back and forth a few times before you can break them. This palm sander is also linked in my Amazon storefront under Furniture Refinishing Tools. This is my beast of a sander. It does all my heavy duty sanding, but when I want a dust-free experience, I do use my Surf Prep sander, but it doesn't really get the nitty-gritty stuff like 80 grit can, and so I do use my hand sander for this. Palm sander, not hand sander. Don't hand sand this. That would be awful. When you're sanding with 80 grit, I typically don't recommend 80 grit unless you're working with raw wood or something like Bondo that you need to really sand down. This stuff is as hard as rock, so it does take a lot of sanding. With the 80 grit, you're going to get all the rough edges, the knots, the Bondo, all of that down. So think of it, the lower the grit, the heavier duty it's going to be. And you are going to want to sand with the grain. So whatever sander you're using, if it's orbital, that can be random. But if it's a sander like this, then you need to move with the grain, which is up and down, back and forth across it, making sure that you don't go sideways or diagonal. Your sanding marks will show like horrible scratches. Now here is your biggest tip and takeaway for today. So get out your pens and write this down. When you're sanding, you can't just stop at 80 grit and then go to 220 to make it smooth. It might feel smooth, but that wood grain is not smooth at all. You want to work up through your sandpaper. So after I'm done with 80, I'm going to move to 100. When I'm done with 100, I'm going to go to 120, then 150, then 180, and then 220 if I feel like it. But typically you can stop at 180, especially if you're staining. Since we're painting and I'm going to prime this, I'm actually going to sand my prime with the 220. With dry decks and Bondo and anything else that you've put on your tabletop, sometimes the sander gets gunked up. I'm using just any scraper that you have. I'm getting the dust off with it, which I should be using a broom, but that's fine. With the sander, when it gets gunked up, I can keep it on and use a putty knife or a 10-inch putty knife for that and kind of just scrape at the sander to get some of those marks off so that I can keep using as much of the sandpaper as I can before I have to replace it. After each sanding session, we're going to call these sessions. So you do a session with the 100, then a session with the 120. You are going to brush off all the dust in between. You can even take a microfiber cloth and wipe down the surface, but you want to remove the majority of that dust so that you're not using the next grit and pushing those wood particles down into the table, potentially making some ugly marks. By the time you get to your 180, it is going to feel like butter. You're going to wipe it off or blow it off. I use my blower most of the time at the end. I'm going to take a tack cloth, but you're going to want to put on gloves first. If you have never felt a tack cloth, it is so sticky. And this sticky, waxy type residue will stay on your hands for a while, even when you wash them. So use that tack cloth. It pulls up all the junk that's in all those crevices and gets it to stick to that cloth. After finishing the sanding of the Bondo and everything else that was on it, I saw a few gaps that just needed a little bit more dry deck, so I'm going to go through and I'm going to make sure that every spot is covered. I'm probably not going to get all of them, but that's the wonderful thing about primer is that once you get your first layer of primer on, you can touch up any other spots that you may have missed because it's going to show you exactly where you're missing. It is time to spray. So I'm using a home right sprayer. Now, I'm going to let you know that this is a disclaimer. You are not supposed to spray shellac. You are not supposed to do it. It's flammable. Every spray gun says it. On the can it says it. You are not supposed to do this. However, I'm working outside. I have a mask on. I've done this for years and I've never had a problem. So I'm going to spray it on because I'm working with multiple pieces right now and I need to do this fast. But if you don't have a sprayer and you don't want to take that risk, then you should probably roll it on or paint it on. I would highly suggest a cabinet roller. They make the application really smooth. This is a home right sprayer. I can spray a lot of stuff through it. It's one of the cheapest sprayers you can get on the market, so I'm using it to show you that it can spray shellac, it can spray other primers, it can spray the paint that we're going to use, which is a water-based Renner lacquer. And so it's an awesome sprayer. You can use it for a lot of different stuff. It is linked in my Amazon storefront. Shellac dries pretty quickly, and so you can feel it to the touch. It's a little bit gritty, and so that's why we're going to sand this with 220. But we also noticed a few variations in the wood that I completely missed, so I'm going to go back through. I'm going to fill those, and then I'm going to go through with the 220, and I'm going to sand this down. This first sanding is primarily to get it pretty far down so I can see most of the wood. It's to even out the surface that much more because wood is wavy and all over the place. This wood was not planed, and so it's not very smooth at all. We're going to get this as smooth as possible. So you can see a lot of the wood grain coming through, but it feels like butter. This is how it should feel before the second layer of primer. I want to take this pause right now to remind you to click subscribe on my channel. It helps my channel out so much, and you guys are getting me watch hours right now, so I cannot tell you how much I appreciate this. Once that second layer dries, it is time to get out the surf prep. If you don't have a surf prep, don't worry. You can buy those sanding squares. Same thing in my Amazon storefront, and they make them in 220, 320, 400, even higher than that. And that's what these sanding pads are. They're very high grits. So I'm using a fine sponge right now, but I wasn't taking it low enough, so I think I opted out for a medium grit so that it could take it down that much more so I can do a third layer of primer. Sponges like this for sanding are great because when you go over the edge, it doesn't take the edge off, it leaves it and it kind of forms around the edge. Third layer of primer is going on, and then a third time sanding this with a very, very soft grit. Finally, the prep is done. The 90% of the work is done and we get to paint this piece. I'm taking odorless mineral spirits with a shop cloth. These are blue cloths, and I'm telling you, I use them for staining, I use them for cleaning. They're fantastic because you can fold them multiple ways and they last way longer than a regular paper towel. These are called shop cloths, but they are technically like a paper towel. So I'm taking the mineral spirits and I'm wiping off all of the sanding dust that wasn't blown off so that this surface can be fully smooth. I'm going to let it dry for about 10 minutes before I begin my painting. Now, this is my garage spray booth. I can actually make multiple rooms with this thing. So behind it, I'm working on a polyurethane based product, and so I needed it to be completely separate from my water-based products, and so I moved my screen over. I filled up my HomeRite sprayer with my hot pink paint and got to work. This is the most fun part of painting. I love watching it because actually painting with a sprayer gun, if you've never tried it, it's so rewarding because the piece instantly changes. So I end up doing 3 layers with this water-based lacquer. Lacquer dries really quickly, and so it's great because within 30 minutes I can recoat the piece. I didn't sand in between this at all because we had done all that prep work to begin with. When you prep your piece properly, you're going to get the most flawless finish and the most beautiful sheen with your paint. The client was super happy. She's already put it in her entryway with a rug that has a pop of this color and a piece of artwork on the opposite wall that has the same color pink. So it's going to be such a bold and beautiful color as soon as you walk into her home. I'm so excited to hear what you guys think about this. Would you put a piece of pink furniture in your home, or is this too bold for you? If you want to check out any of my other videos on furniture flipping, staining, and we just completed a 7-week office remodel, so you have to go check that out. It's in a 5-part series on my channel. Make sure you're subscribed to it. See you next week.